So I recently came back home for a visit, and around the table the subject came to previous holidays, which made me remember this little story of horror, so I thought that you guy may like it. Warning, I was, am, and while I'll always be an asshole, and fully understand that I and my aunt did a shitty borderline sociopathic thing, but my shame had over the years degraded. Also want to give you a heads up that the dialogue in the story is from as best as I could remember, and also translated from Russian. This is also a cross story with /entitled parents. I'm sorry if this isn't the right subreddit for this. Please tell me if I should post this in r/nuclear revenge, as this was technically very dangerous, and there have been people who died from this or seriously got hurt. So this happened a very, very long time ago. Around the time when I was about 9 or 10, so old enough to develop a spiteful mindset. At the time, me and my family, which included me, my mother, M, my grandmother, GM, and my mother's sister, my aunt, NNS. This was during the time when we lived in another country and usually went to the holidays to Ukraine around the Black Sea, which is where this story took place. Every morning, around 8 a.m., we would head towards the beaches, as they were always full and impossibly hot by the time it was midday. So our plan was always, go to the beach and leave by around 11, when it got so hot that you would cook in your own sweat. We would go around the small towns surrounding the beach to play games, arcades, and other entertainment, and then go back to our little special personal houses/huts for rest and lunch. Nevertheless, I digress. So on this particular day, we made it to the beach a little earlier, which meant that we could pick out some of the best parts of the beach and set up our blankets before new amounts of glass and trash were made on the beach. For some background, while the Black Sea is lovely, the beaches around the area are only for the more experienced who know how to avoid the trash areas. Often beaches were full of broken glass bottles, cigarettes, needles, and many other dangerous things, and thus it was highly advised that you wear feet protection when traveling between point A to B. So me and the gal crew, my grandfather, Ray R. Eli, ever came to the holidays with us, as my grandparents owned a massive house with farm animals and couldn't trust anyone to take care of them, so someone had to stay back. And my dad is a deadbeat asshole, so it was always just us girls. Now about that spot. We found the perfect spot and laid out our things and towels, and checked for any bottles or debris, and were rejoiced to find none. We watched the beach fill up with people, and eventually around 10-ish, we noticed that a very large woman with 3 kids approached us. Now the girls in my family are big, but this was a hippo of unbelievable proportions. We were in a spot right between the sea and the entrance, under a big umbrella that was there for public use. She towered over us. There were lots of people around, but still a few spaces available around to sit nearby, which was very surprising. This woman towered over us and loudly groaned and complained. Let's refer to her as EM and her kids EK1, EK2, and EK3, all 3 boys. EM, you are in our spot, she yelled loudly. All of us blinked unanimously in confusion. My mom even started laughing a little, asking, "Are you having a heat stroke, or are you for real?" M loudly gasped and started kicking our towels and stuff. "You are in our spot. We have been sitting here for the last 3 days, and now your fat asses are taking my spot, and because of you my kids are burning their feet waiting for you cows to move," she yelled. My mother's sister had burst into laughter, replying, "Well, whoever the cow in this scenario is, it's definitely not us." Odd translation, I know, but it is direct. No ko-uj karovasdes, tak eto nime. While this was happening, I was building a small sand pile. Her devil spawns suddenly started pushing me and taking some of my sandcastle stuff and bending it, to which I got up and pushed him away and grabbed my shovel and then hit him with it, telling him to bugger off, hitting him repeatedly and hard. I was usually a well-behaved kid, but if I have ever seen anyone try and break my stuff, I would cripple them, as we weren't the richest, and I was protective over my things. The mother gasped and started crying out for me to move, which everyone in the surrounding area glanced at, but it's Ukraine. No one cares. I love my people, and beside there was no one to call for help. Police or guards around the beach are not common or wanted. My mother has stood up fully to her now and told her, "Take your fat." We have a better word, Gioiva, which means fat, hippo ass in one word, and ugly ass somewhere else before the five of us collectively will cripple you. She straight up tries to slap my mother, to which I then responded and took a plastic shovel to her son's eye with sand in it and start jabbing it, as his sibling try and push me away, but I spit in one's face and kick the other. All start crying, and a few people shut out for her to shut her brats up. The mother then stops midway and grabs her spawns and yells at us, "The second you bitches move, I'm taking this spot." I know there were a few more profanities, but I don't remember every word fully or the conversation fully. Now mind you, there was no one to call help for, as the lifeguards were not evenly spaced out and miles away. So we decide to have a miniature revenge. My mother tries to tell me off for assaulting the boys, but my grandmother defends me and said something along the lines of, "Don't be mad at her, she was defending you." To which we all then agree to forget and have fun. Now me and my mother's sisters were a lot closer to being siblings than her and my mother. She was about 10 years older than me, so she was like 19 when I was 9. We went swimming in turns, never leaving the towel and out stuff never unattended. After about 40 minutes, my mother and grandmother tells us to pack things up as they were going to get one last dip as we had ours. So me and MS realize we have a window of opportunity. The revenge. While taking their last dip, me and MS see that the entitled mother is eyeing our spot, and we had an idea. MS was just as petty-minded and asshole-minded. MS told me to too and have a quick look around for broken bottles in the area, and I knew exactly what she was planning. She told me not to touch them by hand and use my shovel and my little claw pickup. I took my bucket and my spatula and started running around for about 15 minutes while she packed everything, and I started picking up glass shards and bottle shards with my spatula, and all the cigarette and all the disgusting thigh I could find, which was not hard. I piled them into the bucket. I then ran back to my aunt, and she saw the bucket full. She told me to be careful and make sure that no one was watching or cared enough to. This wasn't the first Ponzi scheme, revenge plot, and act of disturbing punishment we have done, so I knew what to do. We knew that my mom and grandmother would still take a long time. Turning our backs towards the MS started to take out the glass shards and bottles, and me and her started spreading them around that specific area, as this was not uncommon for people to bury their trash, so no one paid mind to it. We started slightly burying them from visibility. The sharp way up and engulfed that whole area as much as we could while making it look like we were building a sandcastle. My aunt told me to come pick up grandmother and my mom as we saw them getting out of the sea and drying, and she told me to take them around a slightly different route, so that they wouldn't step on our little bubby trap. I watched her get up, and the entitled mother almost pushed her out of the way and yelled at her to move, to which she just smiled and told her to have a lovely day as the five of us cross-met. We slowly started to head a little bit away, and my aunt stops midway, where there are less people to put on a few things and stall for time so we could watch. I saw the entitled mother hastily punting the tower over the sand, without checking it. Big mistake, and slops her fat ass down to only then yell and howls in pain, as she had sat also directly onto the broken glass shards that we hid, cutting up the towel and her leg and thigh entirely. One of the brats, who had also tried to break my things, stepped onto shards and cut his foot, by the looks and sounds of it, and started yelling and crying and breaking down, and the woman yelled in pain. A few people started being convinced by her, and others checked out what happened and tried to help, but the woman screamed profanities. She started rolling around, and all the cigarette buds and seaweed that we had also placed about started coming on her wound and skin, her towel and her things, and engulfs her in trash and all the things that people would be collecting in biohazard suits. My grandmother was horrified. Thinking that we were also sitting on this by my other looked at the two of us. Knowing we did this, she could not say a word and started shoving us away from the beach in a hurry to get out. Me and MS started laughing as my grandmother said, "Oh, praise the Lord that we didn't get cut like that woman, and that it was the grace of God that saved us." Me and MS just continued laughing as my mother took us to the side and told us of. My mom threatened to punish me, usually by shaking me hard, yelling at me that she couldn't ground me on a holiday. But MS took the blame as told me it was worth it. We sat down in a cafe to get us some cold drinks and lunch, and only after about an hour and a half we saw a few paramedics started coming towards the beach, by maybe around 1 p.m/2 p.m. The medical care in Ukraine on holiday locations is piss poor, and the only way you get a doctor helping you if you are dying if that. It was also dead heat of the day to the medical paramedics would be too lazy to go onto the beach, and no one came to help until the sun came down. There was a dude who got tangled in a parachute, and help arrived only, and 1 hour and a half later. It was safe to assume that it was for the entitled mother. That was a satisfying moment as we had realized this woman was basically rolling in a cesspool of illnesses for at least 1/2 hours before any help arrived, baking under +35 sun. We have most likely ruined this woman's holiday, and have most likely put her out of commission for a long time as those bottles, and that hazardous sand and cigarette pits would have definitely given her an infection, or at least seriously made it worse. Paramedics and doctors also need bribes there, so this help would have probably cost her €500 in bribes only, without the cost of any treatment. There are no cameras around, no people who cared, and no proof that we strictly did it, and no way of ever finding us. Hopefully next time that cow learns some manners. Lesson of the story is that don't pick a fight with someone and underestimate their mindsets, 'cause you may just stumble onto sociopaths who will get back at you for being such a delight. Give me a heads up if you want to head about some of the other Ponzi schemes and Count of Monte Cristo revenge stories that me and my aunt have dished out over the years. When you grow up without the internet and only part-time cable TV, you find alternative entertainment procedures which mostly revolve around making a crappy person's day even crappier.
Next story.
So when I got out of the Navy in 1958, like many young men, I joined a fraternity. Now, most of the brothers were nice people except this asshole we'll call Brad. Brad was a 4-time legacy from our fraternity. At first, he seemed nice, but after he became a fully initiated member, he let his inner ass show. He was such an ass because he would always show off with daddy's money. He was 18 and never had a job. He always got super drunk at the parties and got handsy with other people's girlfriends. Now his dad was a political figure in Sacramento, and his mother's father worked in the California system of higher education. Brad knew that he was untouchable and wasn't afraid to let you know. Brad in 1959 crashed 3 cars because he drove drunk. His parents bought a new Cadillac each time because he claimed someone stole and crashed his. When his parent bought him a Buick convertible, he said that he has a reputation to uphold and doesn't want people to think that he is poor. A couple of months into the fall semester, and Brad is drunkenly harassing women at the party, even saying lewd and suggestive things to them. We try to cut him off, but he keeps going on. Some of us go and leave Brad to himself. Hours later, we see a girl leaving Brad's room. I'm thinking in my head she doesn't want to be seen taking the walk of shame. She just cries while covering her face and holding her shoes. I knock on Brad's door, and he says, "Ready for round 2. Get your ass on the bed." When he sees that it is me, he put his clothes on. I ask why that girl was crying, and he said, "How the fuck should I know?" But she was blonde, tan, tight. I ignore him, but I tell the other brother what happened. They know that he is a pig and just brushed it off. A couple of days later, police came to our house and arrested Brad for rape. Apparently, they were watching him because 13 other girls were accusing him. Now Brad had this birthmark on his private parts, so the statements from the girls were taken into account, and he was arrested. The evidence was undeniable, especially with the details that the girls were giving regarding Brad. Due to him being the sexual predator, he was expelled from the chapter, without him knowing important later. So we and one of the sororities on campus started a support group for the victims. Girl 1 was saying how Brad made her feel, and that she wanted to get back at him. Girl 2 was talking about if she had the chance, she would kick his ass. So one of our brothers, who we'll call Ralph, said, "Ralph, well, why don't you?" Girls, "What?" Ralph, "When he comes back to the house, we can take him somewhere, and you can have some time with him. In the desert, alone." So mere days after Brad was arrested, he was bailed out the help from mommy and daddy, and he came back to the house. We started lying, saying how we know that the charges were BS. He said, "Brad, yeah, my dad has a whole team of lawyers representing me. This is going to go away fast." Brad gets drunk, but Ralph roofied him. Ralph and some of the other guys proceed to drive 3 hours east from the coast into the California desert. Ralph and some of the other guys meet the 9 of the 13 girls in the desert. They wake up Brad, who is still somewhat drunk, and push him out of the car. Now as Brad wakes up, I was told that he went pale-face as he saw the women that he victimized were standing over him with blunt objects, stabbing weapons, and a shovel. Brad cries out to Ralph and the other guys. Brad, sniffling, "You've can't leave me here alone." Ralph said, "Ralph, you aren't alone, you have plenty of company, and you know everybody there." The guys drove off, and the girls came back to campus 3 hours later, with dirt on their clothes and a red-stained potato sack. Us guys never knew what became of Brad, but to this day, when we see the remaining girls that are living, we never ask.
Next story.
I have lived in an apartment complex in Lisbon, Portugal. The where is important. For the last 4 years. If anyone's from here, you'll know parking is hell. Fortunately, my building has a private garage. However, as is often the case, some parking places are more difficult to park in than others. I have one of the easier ones. Last year, I was offered a job abroad and took it. Thought I'd be nice, parked my car at my parents' where they have plenty of space, and left a notice in the building elevator that went along the lines of, "I'm the owner of 3B and will be away for at least 6 months. Feel free to use my parking spot." Ended up being away for longer, almost a year. Came back to see my parking spot occupied, which was okay, since I offered for it to be used. Put another notice in the elevator, this time to say I was back and would use the parking spot again. Gave it 2 days and picked my car up from my parents. Went into my garage and my space was still being used. Had to park somewhere on the street and decided to give it another day. The day after, it was occupied again by the same car. Asked a couple neighbors and figured out it belonged to a lady living 2 stories above me. Went up to talk to her, and she immediately got defensive and said that her parking spot is very difficult for her to park in. And since I was away for longer than I had announced, I lost the space, which is a stupid logic, as the spots are bought with the apartment. It literally belongs to me. She also told me I couldn't use her parking space instead, as she was using it for storage. Went to the building admin, who said he'd talk to her. He did, and came back shaking his head. Nothing. I sent a registered letter telling her to stop using my space and giving her 48 hours to take her car elsewhere. The next day, I saw the unopened letter in the garbage bin beside the mailboxes. I ended up scouting my garage, waiting for her to leave, and would immediately park my car, hoping she'd take the hint. She didn't, and we ended up doing this dance for a few weeks, up until the day I came back to see my entire driver's side keyed. That was the final straw. I talked to a friend who owns a towing company. We chose a Saturday morning. The last few weeks, she hadn't left home on Saturdays. I knew, as I had been watching her car like a hawk. So I thought we'd have big chances of her not noticing anything until everything was done, and towed her car. The plan initially was to leave the car just down the road. but that felt too close and too easy. Then I thought about leaving it in a city about 15 minutes away, but it still didn't feel quite right. My friend jokingly said, "Let's leave it in Madrid." Madrid is in Spain, about 600 kilometers, 375 miles away. I knew he was joking, but Madrid did feel right. I asked if he had enough time. He had, so off we went. Once we got to Madrid, we went out for lunch, strolled around the city, and waited until it got dark and the streets empty. In the meantime, we had already decided on where to leave the car, a handicapped parking close to a police station. And so we did. As a bonus, my friend also took both license plates off the car. Then we drove back home. It has been 2 weeks, and I haven't seen her car since. One of these days I might leave a letter in her mailbox telling her to contact Madrid police, but in the meantime I'll enjoy being able to use my parking whenever I want to.